Hi, so welcome to Journey into Parenting. So today I've got Paul Clark here to do an interview, and we thought it'd be really interesting to have a conversation about what life looks like now that we're sort of beginning to emerge from the coronavirus lockdown, and kind of looking at the fact that actually, the world has changed, or we've been changed as individuals. By the experience, and actually are there things that we can carry forward from that. And I'm noticing within myself a little bit of I don't know, a bit of kind of sadness or grief about the fact that things are starting to go back to normal, in the sense that I'm really happy that the risk is lowering for people, but also the fact that I just loved the lack of air pollution and the quiet and the way that people have been coming together to support each other. And so for me, in a way, as things start to kind of go back to normal, I'm experiencing a loss actually of those things. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about all of that.
Similar, that sense of, well, that dual sense of sensing into this field of grief and of loss and of which is colossal and global, and which I'm blessed in not being so touched by that individually yet, and there is still a virus, there's still a long road to go ahead on this. And also this bizarre thing, the lockdown, the people are calling it different things. I can't remember the terms now, but they're kind of like a great awakening or a great sort of stillness. The planet's breathing again, as you were saying, with pollution and with your air travel down. Even the chopping of the Amazonian rainforest down. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are beneficial to the planet we're on, and counter what we are doing to the planet that we're on, so that there is that's both a breathing for the planet and an opportunity potentially as well.
I think there's something around the fact that, like, what strikes me is the way that people, governments have responded to immediate threat to life in a very proactive way. And I think with the issue of climate change, but not just climate change, the broader kind of degradation of the environment, we're still looking at loss of life, possibly on a catastrophic scale, but somehow, because it's somewhat in the future, or it's not quite as tangible, there isn't the same level of kind of government response to that. And I feel quite strongly about this, actually, that I feel like a devastating impact to our children or our grandchildren is just as as valid. It's just as worth responding to as kind of very immediate threat to life.
Yes. And I mean, in a way, we've been granted. It's an odd thing. Just to say, it's odd to be looking at all the benefits when currently, I mean, the care home situation, things like that. I mean, there are horrendous things, but it's like a rehearsal for how we can raise our game, how we can operate at a system that's nationwide, global wide, in order to address problems, because the direction of travel with populism, with sort of the cutting back of the social infrastructure in many countries, the predominance of free markets. I have a problem with free markets, no problem with markets, but markets utterly unregulated. It's about like letting the weeds grow in your garden completely and strangle everything else. But there's a real opportunity, and the collective action that I'm seeing locally in our little village here, in seeing in the colossal way people are suddenly coming out supporting the NHS, supporting the shelf stackers in the supermarkets, and seeing their value. That sense of valuing the people who are the kind of the lowest. I mean, there's that Bob Dylan's song, where he quotes the Bible, thing, you who will be last will be first, and all that thing. And that's something like that reevaluating has happened. And I think we're looking at where's been really successful. A couple of days ago, I was talking to two friends in New Zealand by Zoom, which was fantastic, that sense of linkage. And also where they're at in a society that has really, you're cutting across all political boundaries, the racial boundaries, whatever, has come together as if it is one big family, led by a woman who brings a sense in responding to this, and in the past to a terrorist atrocity, of leading as if we are all one family, so that actually people become one family. So the right-wing party she's in coalition with goes along with gun control. So now the lockdown is, they locked down before there were any deaths, no hesitation.
Wow.
And that degree of focus is exactly, you're dead right, is exactly what is needed for the sea change in relation to environment and in relation to climate change.
Sounds amazing. Can you explain more about the New Zealand situation, like what it is that they've done so well, and how she's managed to get people on board? So I don't actually know the name of the.
Right. Oh, Jacinta Ardern
Okay.
is the name of the Prime Minister. Yeah. Um, there's an interesting video doing the Facebook rounds, which is kind of on the one side of the screen is Jacinta Ardern, on the other side of the screen is Boris Johnson, and it's, there are some things really good this government has done, but there's been a litany, I think, of failures or mindset failures, where you can't see all the resources at your disposal, local authorities, the people who can really help. In New Zealand, from the word go, they saw that this was a potentially serious situation. And to be fair, there are, it's not a vast population spread on it is an island. There are advantages if you're looking to tackle something. Although, having said that, Britain is an island too. So they immediately did things around people coming into the country. They immediately ramped up testing, but particularly social isolation, and the tracking and tracing of people when it was possible to do, because it was so small, the number of people with the virus, that they would, identify someone, track all their contacts, and then, so that would be like a fire that comes up and then it's put out before it's too big to control. And what's remarkable, it's worth looking at Jacinta Ardern's broadcasts, they're on YouTube and things like that, to New Zealand people. The tone is so much as it was when she responded to that terrorist attack in New Zealand, when white kind of right-wing activists machine gunned down Muslims at worship, and she made it about us as the family, and she's done that with this. We are a family. We, all the people in New Zealand, we are a family. We will get through this, but we have to act together. And she did one particular broadcast to children, and this is relevant to all that you're doing in parenting and everything. And it was just perfectly pitched. It wasn't inciting fear, but it was being real. And suggesting in language easy to understand, what are we doing here? This is what we're doing it for. You're really important in this, and it will be hard, parts of it, isolating, missing your friends, all the rest of it. That to me is a quality of leadership that we're desperate for, and it's worked, and it's brought with it people of across the beliefs across the political spectrum in New Zealand. So Jacinta Ardern, I mean, she's almost become a joke that everyone wants to kind of kidnap her and make them their prime minister or something around the world. She's been an inspiration. Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, that all sounds incredible.
No.
Especially, I think, addressing children directly, because I feel like children are often marginalized or kind of patronized by adults, and actually, they're much more capable than we give them credit for a lot of the time. So I think that's really fantastic. But what strikes me about Jacinda is that, like, she's not, it doesn't sound like she's wishy-washy. Like it's not that she's kind of using consensus decision making or necessarily trying to please everybody, but just perhaps kind of sort of sitting deeply within her own integrity. And I'm wondering, you know, whether that's a quality that you would kind of value quite highly in a leader, in the sense of kind of,
Yeah.
somebody who's able to, you know, maybe kind of put their own ego and desires aside to a degree, but kind of take on. I like this notion of kind of leadership as service. So kind of scanning the big picture, you know, and using your discernment, you know, as best as you can, because obviously there's so much potential information that it can be difficult to be discerning, but to kind of use your discernment to try and figure out what kind of serves the whole. And the other thing that just popped into my head is Iain McGilchrist's work. And he talks a lot about the left and the right brain, and how we tend to live in a kind of left brain dominated culture, and that the left brain is sort of, it's the kind of practical problem solving part of the brain, but it's also, it can be quite kind of narrow in its focus, repetitive, and the right brain is where all of the kind of deep wisdom lives, but that part of the brain doesn't have access to language, so we need to use other, you know, other ways to let that come through, such as you know, writing or meditation or other forms of art. And what this makes me think of is actually, you know, in leadership, I think the right brain has got a really important role to play, of actually having the courage to kind of, I guess, go against the mainstream and really kind of listen to our deepest wisdom. And I think it's kind of, you know, probably a lot of the time people are sort of, they're accessing that deep wisdom, but they don't necessarily call it that or realize that's what it is. Like for example, when I've spoken to people that are really great scientists, and I ask them, you know, okay, well, how did you come up with that theory, or that, you know, make that discovery? And often they'll say, oh, it was just intuitive, you know, and then I checked it out and it worked, but actually somehow it kind of, it comes from this more place. So I think maybe allowing the right brain to have a role in leadership could be a really interesting way forwards.
I mean, 100% what you're saying, and I haven't read it, Iain McGilchrist, but I will do. My recent training is in a psychosynthesis coaching for leadership course, so it brought those two things together. If people don't know what psychosynthesis is, it's kind of a lot of theories of who we are as people tend to compete with each other. It's like they're on a kind of playing field of magic bullets. No, it's my magic bullet. It's Freudian. No, it's Jungian. And Sagioli, who founded psychosynthesis, was originally a student of Freud, who wanted him to be his, you know, kind of key man in Italy and spreading it around. But by then, Sagioli's big revelation was, you know, it's not that we're Freudian, that we're Jungian, that we're personality, that we're subconscious. We're all these things. And so psychosynthesis sounds jargony, but it's actually a synthesis of all the approaches that are relevant and good and can work to each of us as unique individuals, so that tailoring what works for each individual and each circumstance. And in my head, you can scale that up and say what we need now is a sociosynthesis, which draws together the benefits of market forces, which can have some benefits, the benefits of the commons, the things we commonly own, the benefits of a sense of localism, a sense of national and international leadership and collective action, as well as competition in its place. The importance of regulation, one of those things that's demonized nowadays. And my example of that at the moment, Kate Raworth, a British economist, has been doing work that is now influencing New Zealand. Amsterdam has taken on her ideas, and that's what it is. It's not an either or and a polarized thing. It's a synthesis of all those things. But the right brain and the left brain, you on that kind of personal scale, or that sort of systemic scale, whether it's a street or a country or a world, to me, powers through it. That sense of the right and left brain coming into synthesis, the one informing the other. And you asked about leadership examples. Just one came to mind. I mean, there are a few I've been thinking of. And again, it's a woman leader. She's a minister in the British government, which was Mo Mowlam.
I met her actually.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
God,
it's interesting because when I was like 17, I got really into politics, and so my dad took me along to this Labour Party event, and Mo Mowlam was there, and I went up to her and said, I want to be a politician, how do I do it? And she said, do anything else.
Yes.
And if you end up in politics, great, and if you don't, great. Like, you know, she basically said it's better to sort of have you know, your life experiences and then let that lead you into politics if that's where you naturally go. But she kind of was quite scathing of people who were condemned, who were career politicians.
Yeah, and they couldn't cope with her in the end. Within the Labour Party, she was targeted quite a lot, which is appalling. But yeah, and had a bad experience. But just there's one moment when she met. It's great that you've met her. I love that. That's funny. She was kind of walking into this tangled mess of Northern Ireland and walking into a room with I think it was Gerry Adams and David Trimble. You know, kind of part of a tribalism that went back hundreds of years. It wasn't just those two people standing in the room. They were representing two poles of a conflict that was just intractable. And it was a room where you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. And she was walking in as a woman in a fairly misogynist kind of political culture as well. And they were, you know, there was this friction coming out between in the first few exchanges. And I hope I'm telling this right, but she kind of said, oh, well, let's have a whiskey, or went to pour herself one. And she said, it's really hot in here. And I said, sorry, I'm just going to take this off. And she took her wig off. No one knew she had a wig. It was, you know, something that she was keeping, you know, that she was going through cancer treatment, and it's what she eventually died of. And it, you know, it became a room with three human beings in it, because it's utterly trashed the rivalries, the maneuverings, that whole sort of, I was going to say male, but it's not, it's human, although there is a certain pattern to competitive male egos, and then, you know, sort of, I don't know, the causes that get ossified. It cut through it all. It made it human, and that was leadership of an extraordinary degree. And I think that you know, the people I find really impressive are politicians generally. I mean, Nelson Mandela. You know, the people who turn it on this head, get people suddenly finding the capacity to put themselves in someone else's shoes. So they might be on an opposite divide to on an issue, but actually here is the more than, the whole of the complexity of the human in all its flaws and glory. And you know, for her to make herself so vulnerable, but from a complete confident place, transform the history of a part of this kingdom, all ours actually, you know, transformed the Irish problem, which belonged to all of us, to peace.
That's incredible, and it answers a question that I've had actually, and I think like there's so much in what you've just said, and stuff that I'd like to explore more deeply around, you know, perhaps looking at the kind of the collective shadow of our culture and of government, and I think moving into a new phase where, you know, I guess we acknowledge that we're all of it, that kind of every human capacity, every human potential is within each of us in a way. You know, like we can all be kind of generous and kind, but we can also all be kind of like egotistical and, you know, controlling and all of those things as well. And I feel like if we can own our personal shadow, then we can start to kind of become perhaps more united. But I think what has come up for me over the last couple of days is a question around the fact that I'd sort of what I'd most love is a situation where people on opposite sides of a, you know, conflict or debate are able to really hear each other, and kind of realizing that actually, you know, I'm not going to get them, you know, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a singing bowl. You know, they're part of the yeah. But actually, that story about Mo Mowlam kind of really demonstrates how you know, it isn't about getting them to do things my way. It's about actually, you know, genuinely being able to kind of meet people where they are on a very human level, and that incredibly you know, courageous act of being vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess underneath it, you know, we're all just kind of like, you know, we're prey animals, or, you know, we've all got our kind of frightened little child kind of hiding within each of us, and, you know.
Yeah. I think we all have parts, and we all have histories. And again, the psychosynthesis thing, what I love about it, and it's not exclusive to psychosynthesis, it's is that sense that we are all these things, and we hold all these things, and we are more than that. There is a potential in us as well. Satyoli talks about the self with a small s, which is a bundle of all that's going on moment to moment in us, that's triggered by our past or our unconscious, or fear of what's something happening now, or of creativity, of all the you know, shadow and the light. And the sense there is a self with a capital S, and that also ties in with Jungian and ties in with that connection to a sort of becoming a channel of something bigger than us as well. And the job in the framing of it within, say, coaching or therapy, psychotherapy or whatever, is that my job would be to be enough aware of myself so I can really meet the other person. I'm not on an ego trip, I'm not on a trying to fix, I'm not on anything like that, but to be really present in order to see the whole of them, and be looking for the moments that I can reflect back, which are about those glimpses of the bigger self, that sense of the gap between where they're at now, what they're capable of, and where there's some little, you know, they light up when they use a word, or they, you know, so that sense of potential. I think there's something in, going back to New Zealand or Northern Ireland at that time, there's something about that kind of place to come from, which Mo Mowlam had, which Jacinta Ardern had, where you see these, you know, intractable enemies and you see two human beings, and you trust. I mean, to take your wig off is to trust someone that you're not going to be ridiculed, that you're not, that it's not going to, they're not going to run out of the room, you know. So that sense of making yourself vulnerable, and Jacinta Ardern had just had her first child, you whilst Prime Minister. I mean, extraordinary kind of sense, which I think gave an opening to a deeper sense of what our government is. If you're in New Zealand, what are, you know, that there's that metaphor of family became something real to people, because they've been with her through that process at the same time as she was in politics in this normally fairly toxic kind of environment, turning it to something more than, and that's why I'm interested also in this individually, how can we be more than? Systemically, how can you break through this modern cynicism and polarization and recognize the potential for more than in that system in all its complexity? If we're channeling that sense of system with a big S, that's yeah, that's my thing. And yeah.
It's great, and it's kind of this conversation's really feeding me, because I'm in the process of writing a PhD proposal, and I'd like my PhD to be related to this, and sort of centered around kind of parents and children, but actually looking at you know, what's possible, like, you know, how can we help people to transition more easily into parenthood, and then when we get when they get there, how can we support them more effectively? Because ultimately, the way that we raise our children creates the foundations for the society.
Yeah, it is the future. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So it's something that I want to get deeper into, and take some care over the
yeah, yeah.
process. And I think it's also kind of giving me some confidence, hearing you talk, because I think, I guess, being female and, from a working class background, and kind of,
Mm, mm,
not really having regarded myself as intelligent until quite
mm.
recently, and kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, and sort of, but I guess being, seeing how, having done a lot of kind of personal work, and also being quite intuitive, that those things are perhaps part of what we need in
Yeah,
moving forwards.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And it's,
Um,
so I'm wondering if it's, maybe not necessarily, um, female leadership, but there's something about, like whole brain leadership,
mm,
perhaps, or, um, leadership, that kind of, I had a great conversation with a friend a couple of years ago, and we were kind of saying, oh, well, shouldn't it be the case that people who are sort of, the most kind of evolved within themselves, those are the ones that are kind of in charge and holding us. And that there's something about that
mm.
ideal that,
I mean,
inspirational.
yeah, I love that. There's something about, in a democracy, there's something about the system learning to elect people like that as well, which is
Learning to what, sorry?
learning to elect people
Aha,
like
yeah.
that, which Denmark has, which Iceland has, which New Zealand has.
Yeah.
So I think I think it is an ideal. I think that is a good one. Um, and I think that, and I agree with the right brain, left brain thing, and in true synthesis tradition, I say, and women's leadership as well, because that leads to more men's leadership, of
Mhm.
men in touch with their feminine.
Mhm.
And there's many great examples, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, all the kind of usual people, David Attenborough, I don't know,
Okay.
who hold that
Yeah.
feminine within them as well, that wisdom of
Mhm.
being at ease with complexity, actually, and being at
Oh, that's
ease
interesting.
with an optimistic view of human nature,
Yeah,
which is
beautiful.
a big one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just a thought on that. I can't remember the name of the guy, but it's been a story recently about how someone he's written a book called Humankind. That's the name of the book, and it's about um, the fact that it's a myth that we are fundamentally defined by competitiveness and preying on others and selfishness. And he takes the example of the novel The Lord of the Flies, about the children, again relevant to children left on an island and sort of turning on each other, turning into an utterly dysfunctional society, which was William Goldsmith's fictional story. And he discovered an actual story where a group of children had got marooned on an island. I think it was off Australia, around about the same period. And whether or not it influenced that novel or not, but they were marooned for, I think, over a year on an island. And I think it wasn't just boys; it was girls, boys, and had to survive complete isolation, not even knowing that they'd be rescued. And when they were rescued, they created a little society. They shared in everything. They had, yeah, they were out of very limited resources, creating food, creating shelter. And what had blossomed was the best of them.
Mm.
So it doesn't mean that would happen with every group of children isolated on islands, and I'm not suggesting that as an experiment either, but that sense of human nature not necessarily being defined by the more cynical definitions of it. Across the political spectrum, you will get those cynical assumptions about selfishness and greed, which have a basis, strong basis. We're trashing the planet. There's clearly but the capacity for us to change.
Mm.
Again, the Kate Ralph's book Donut Economics is just almost like this is how it could look if we took the best of ourselves, and loads of examples of where it's happening, and then made that, ditched GDP and that very always think it's quite phallic, that sense of an ever-rising line of gross national product that goes on forever, unlimited growth. There's no other science that talks about unlimited growth as a good thing.
Yeah, it's
Gardening
interesting,
doesn't.
and it's quite
Mm.
you know, it makes the economy very disconnected from the actual resources that we have in the world, which is a big part of the problem. But I really love, I always talk about this, but I really love Charles Eisenstein's book,
Yeah.
Economics, and he talks about, this kind of rising line, and that in some way it's a replacement for the kind of this search for kind of immortality, like something that
Oh,
people
that's a
may
good
have
one.
got from in
Yes.
previous times, but now they're sort of looking for that through money, that somehow, you know, if I have more and more money, then I can, you know, I can buy my way to immortality, more or less.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And the replacement that Kate Ralph has, it's like a halo tied in with the sacred. It's that you have two measures in your economy. The one is human well-being, and that's based on all the things we've said through the UN, through the post-1945, around basic standards of education, health, basic freedoms, access to justice. So that's that line, that's the measure. And the other measure is the health of our environment and our planet. And that is your compass for how you guide your country. And it's very close to what New Zealand has taken on now, Denmark, Iceland, and Kate Ralph herself is advising Amsterdam on its future city policy. And it integrates, it's a synthesis of all those things. So that's to me, that's a sort of compass for finding our way out of where we are now, and that
so it's
personal,
a kind of like retethering the way we manage our countries to what's actually here, like the actual quantity of resources.
Yeah, absolutely, and the good life that's possible within that. I mean, it's this sense of competing for scarcity, and immigrants are going to come up and steal our jobs and money rather than save our lives in the NHS, as they tend to. The sort of sense of fear-driven. I mean, fear and love. Two things that Jules Wingfield, whose work I love, she used to have this thing where you'd meet another person and gaze into their eyes and just speak whether you're in fear or love.
I've done that exercise with her too.
Yeah. I mean, she's amazing, and she has that sense of the individual and the systemic massively from Earth Heart, a place in the Forest of Dean, and she's running Sunday nights at the moment, feeling the grief of what we're all going through, but also that awakening of possibility within that. So yeah, Charles Eisenstein as well. Yeah, great. That sense of possibility and that compass underpin my question. Your first question of all this was coming out of this period we're in, and I wrote something I'm putting out to friends around what is there from reading it, which is why I'm not looking at the camera. What is there from this time of lockdown that you'd like to sustain and integrate into our personal and our collective lives in the future? So it's just a kind of open question. It's the individual and it's the systemic, and actually it's great doing this conversation because it's kind of reinforced. That's
great. Well, we can, you know, put this out there into the world, and if anyone who's got this far through, because it has been a really fantastic conversation, if anyone's made it this far, please put your comments below, because we'd really love to hear those as well.
Great.
Right, well, that's very rich. There's been so much in there, and actually, if you can send me details of all the books you've referenced,
we'll do.
in the show notes as well, because I think that would be really interesting to follow up.
We'll do, and thank you. It has been great. It's been inspiring for me as well. It's
amazing.
Thank you so much. Hope you get to do your thesis. It sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.